I never imagined my own son would try to send me to prison. Not for money, not for a house, but because greed had devoured whatever love used to live inside him. The night it happened, my granddaughter Lucy saved my life. She was only 13, still small enough to cling to the edge of my robe when thunder frightened her, still innocent enough to think good always wins in the end. That morning, she said she felt sick. By evening, she would uncover the truth that would destroy our family forever. It started with a sound, the sharp click of a key turning in our front door. I didn't hear it. I was upstairs, changing out of my old housecoat, thinking only about whether I had enough time for the soup I planned to make. But Lucy, she heard it. She felt it in her chest like a heartbeat gone wrong. She told me later how she froze, her breath stuck halfway in her throat when she saw the door open and her father, Daniel, step inside. He wasn't supposed to be there. He told me his firm was sending him to Burlington for the day. But there he was, his gray coat dripping with rain, his movements stiff, careful, wrong. He didn't call out. He didn't even wipe his feet. He just walked straight to the coat rack beside the piano, the one where my old green winter coat hung. I've had that coat for 20 years. It's wool, frayed at the cuffs, still smelling faintly of cedar from the chest upstairs. My late mother gave it to me the winter before she passed. It's more than cloth. It's memory stitched with love. Lucy said he looked at that coat for a long time, like a man choosing where to bury a secret. Then he reached into his pocket, took something small and white, and slipped it into mine. She didn't know what it was, only that something about his movements felt wrong, secretive, cruel. Then, as if to confirm it, Daniel pulled out his phone. Lucy heard his voice, low but clear enough through the quiet. "It's done. By tonight. She won't understand a thing." He paused, then added, "Make the call at 9. The police will do the rest." And then he left, calmly, softly, like a man who had just committed the perfect crime. Lucy stood frozen behind her door, shaking so hard she thought the sound of her heartbeat would give her away. When she finally dared to peek again, the hall was empty. Only the echo of his words lingered in the house. Upstairs, I buttoned my gray blouse, brushed my hair, and checked the clock. It was nearly noon. I thought about the day ahead, about the chill creeping in through the windows, about how the rain would ruin my plans to tend to the garden. I had no idea my own son had just planted something in my coat, something that could destroy me, steal my home, and leave me branded as a criminal. At the time, I was simply thinking about soup. That's the cruel thing about betrayal. It doesn't announce itself with thunder or lightning. It hides inside the ordinary. When I came downstairs, Lucy was sitting on the sofa, the TV still on, but muted. Her hands were clasped tight in her lap. Her little fingers twitched like she was trying to squeeze courage out of them. "Feeling any better, sweetheart?" I asked. She nodded too quickly. "A bit. I think I just need rest." I smiled, though something in her tone unsettled me. Her voice had that tightness children get when they've seen something they can't explain. But I didn't push. Children have their moods, I told myself. "Would you like some tea?" She nodded again. "Earl Grey, please." I brewed the tea, the aroma filling the kitchen, that warm citrusy scent that always makes me feel less alone. I spread butter on toast, added a spoon of strawberry jam from last summer's jar. We ate in silence. The comfortable kind, I thought, but it wasn't. Now, I know that silence was loaded, trembling beneath the surface with fear. Outside, the rain turned heavier, streaking the window glass. The world looked distant, blurred as if even the sky didn't want to witness what was about to unfold. After breakfast, I busied myself with chores. I wiped the counter, arranged the mugs, folded the dishcloth, all the little rituals that give a lonely woman's morning a sense of order. Lucy stayed quiet, her eyes darting often toward the coat rack. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "you can lie down if you'd like. I'll wake you for lunch." She hesitated before nodding. "Okay, Grandma." When she left the room, I sighed, resting a hand on my chest. My heart felt heavy that morning, though I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was just the weather. Maybe it was the way Daniel's absence had stretched into something I could no longer call distance. It felt like exile. I'd raised that boy alone, after his father vanished without a word. I cleaned houses, washed hospital floors, and stitched every dollar together just to keep us afloat. When Daniel became an architect, I thought my sacrifices had finally meant something. But lately, His eyes had changed. They carried a cold I didn't recognize. He visited less, called less. And when he did, he always brought papers, legal ones I couldn't fully read without my glasses. "It's just precaution, Mom," he'd say. "In case something happens to you, the house will stay in the family." The last time he brought those papers, 3 months ago, I'd almost signed, but something in my gut whispered, "Wait." So I did. And that hesitation, that single moment of intuition, was the only thing that saved me from losing everything. When the clock struck noon, I poured myself another cup of coffee and looked toward the garden. The maple leaves were bleeding into amber and gold. My life had been long, ordinary, quiet. I thought that was safety. I didn't know that peace can be the silence before the storm. Upstairs, Lucy lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, her hands trembling as she replayed what she had seen. She thought about calling the police, about confronting her father, about warning me. But fear tangled her thoughts. What if no one believed her? What if she made things worse? So she stayed silent, but she began to plan. In her small, frightened heart, she made a promise. Whatever her father was doing, she wouldn't let it hurt me. By the time the rain turned to a gray drizzle that afternoon, Lucy had already decided she would find out what he'd hidden and why. And me? I went about my day, humming softly, thinking of dinner, unaware that every clock in that house had just begun counting down to the worst night of my life. If you've ever trusted someone you shouldn't have, if you've ever looked into the eyes of your own child and realized they saw you as an obstacle instead of a mother, then stay with me. Because this isn't just a story, it's a warning written in the blood of what I loved most. Give it a like if you're still here, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were me that night? They say every old house has a soul. If that's true, then the house on Waverly Hill has mine stitched into its beams. I've lived here for 68 years, through storms, winters, loneliness, and the quiet echo of laughter that used to fill these halls. My mother was born here. So was I. 3 generations of women who refused to leave, even when life tried to push us out. The walls are pale yellow now, the same shade I painted 20 years ago after Daniel's college graduation. I remember standing on a ladder, my arms trembling from fatigue but my heart full of pride. My son had done it the first in our family to earn a degree. I thought it meant a better life for him, for us. Now, when I look at those same walls, I see faint stains under the paint, small reminders that some happiness doesn't survive long enough to become memory. That afternoon, after Lucy said she'd rest, I walked from room to room tidying, not because anything needed cleaning, but because order helps me think. The clock above the mantel chimed 12:30, a soft, metallic sound that's comforted me for decades. Everything in this house has a rhythm, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the wooden stairs, the whisper of wind through the attic vent. I used to think of it as music. Now it feels more like breathing, like the house itself has been holding its breath, waiting for something terrible. When I passed the coat rack by the door, my fingers brushed the fabric of my green coat. Still damp from the morning air, still heavy with the smell of rain. I didn't know yet what was inside. I only felt a faint chill crawl through me, the kind that makes the hairs on your arm rise without reason. Outside, the rain had softened to mist. The world looked blurred, unreal, like a dream half remembered. I opened the window slightly, breathing in the damp air, and thought of Daniel. He'd always been a clever boy, clever enough to charm his teachers, to draw perfect blueprints before he could even drive. But there was always something restless about him, like a hunger for more than what life offered. When he was young, he used to say, "Mom, one day I'll make us rich. You won't ever have to clean again." I believed him. I believed in him more than I believed in myself. After his wife died in that car accident 2 years ago, Daniel changed. His laughter grew short, his visits fewer, his voice harder. At first, I thought it was grief that he simply didn't know how to heal. But soon, I noticed other things. Late-night phone calls, missed work, hollow excuses. He'd stopped talking about building homes. He'd started talking about selling them, especially this one. One afternoon, he brought a woman named Vanessa Clark, a realtor with perfect nails, and a perfume so strong it clung to the curtains after she left. "Mom," Daniel had said, "Vanessa says houses like yours are worth a fortune now. Developers are buying up the whole hill. We could sell this place and split the money." I laughed it off. This house isn't just wood and nails, Danny. It's family. It's everything we've built. He'd smiled then, a thin, polite smile. Sure, Mom. Just think about it. But his eyes, they were already somewhere else. That was the moment something inside me began to whisper, he's slipping away. I just didn't know how far he'd already gone. When Lucy woke from her nap later that day, she seemed calmer. She sat with me in the kitchen, doodling quietly while I chopped carrots for soup. You know, I said, stirring the pot, when your dad was your age, he used to help me cook. He'd stand on a chair, pretending to be a chef. Lucy smiled faintly. Did he make a mess? Oh, always. Flour on his hair, sauce on the walls. But he was proud of every terrible pie he baked. She laughed a short, shy sound that warmed me for a moment, but then her expression changed, and she looked down again, sketching furiously on the paper. I noticed her hand trembled slightly. Everything okay, sweetheart? She hesitated. Grandma, do you ever think people can change? Like, become someone else, even if they used to be good? Her question hit me harder than she knew. I set down the spoon. I think people can hide who they are for a long time, I said quietly. But when life squeezes them when they're scared or desperate, the truth always finds its way out. Lucy nodded without looking up. Her pencil moved slower now. If I'd known what she'd seen that morning, I would have recognized the fear behind her question. But I didn't. I only felt a vague unease, like a storm forming beyond the horizon. By late afternoon, the soup simmered on the stove. The smell of chicken and thyme filled the house, mixing with the faint scent of wood smoke from the fireplace. I set 2 bowls on the table. Lucy barely touched hers. She stirred the broth in slow circles, her mind clearly elsewhere. You're quiet today, I said. Is it your stomach? She shook her head. No, just thinking. About school? She hesitated. About people. I smiled, trying to lighten the mood. That sounds serious for a 13-year-old. But she didn't laugh. That was when I realized her eyes. Those big, soft brown eyes looked older somehow, tired. When dinner ended, she offered to wash the dishes. She never did that unless something was bothering her. Don't worry about it, I said. Go rest. I'll take care of the kitchen. But she insisted, and as I watched her carefully rinse each plate, I felt that unease again, the invisible crack that had started spreading through our quiet lives. Later, after Lucy went upstairs, I sat alone in the living room with the lights dimmed. The house felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't peace, it's suspense. I looked around at the framed photographs on the mantel. Daniel as a boy holding a wooden plane. Daniel at his wedding, grinning beside his bride. Daniel cradling baby Lucy in his arms. The man in those pictures looked nothing like the one who'd stopped answering my calls, who snapped at me when I asked too many questions. My heart wanted to believe he was just lost. But my instincts, the same ones that had raised him alone through poverty and heartbreak, whispered something darker. Still, even in my worry, I never imagined what he was truly capable of. I didn't know that only a few hours later, those same walls that had held our laughter would witness betrayal so cruel it would burn away everything I thought I knew about family. That evening, rain began to fall again. Gentle at first, then steady. The sound against the windows was rhythmic, hypnotic. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and settled into my armchair. The cat curled up beside me. For a brief moment, I felt peace again, fragile, temporary, like the last calm breath before the plunge. If anyone had passed by the house that night, they would have seen a warm light glowing from the windows and thought, how peaceful that old home looks. They wouldn't know that beneath its roof, a storm far worse than rain was quietly gathering. Because evil doesn't always enter through the front door. Sometimes it's already living inside. The first time Daniel brought me the papers, it was a bright spring afternoon. The dogwoods had just begun to bloom outside the kitchen window, scattering white petals across the porch. He arrived with that warm, easy smile that used to melt me every time he needed something, the same smile that once meant I love you, Mom, and now only meant I want something from you. He placed a thick brown folder on the table between us. Mom, he said, it's just legal protection, power of attorney, some property stuff. You don't need to worry. The word property made me uneasy. I'd worked too many years to hear that word without feeling something twist in my chest. What kind of protection, Daniel? I asked carefully. He sighed and leaned back in the chair, rubbing his temples as though he was the one burdened. Just in case something happens to you, the house will be in good hands. Mine. It's the logical thing to do. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. I ran my fingers over the folder. The paper inside felt heavy, too official. I wasn't stupid, just old. I couldn't see fine print like I used to, but I could still sense when something smelled wrong. I'll think about it, I said, closing the folder. He didn't like that. His jaw tightened. Mom, this isn't something to think about. You're 68. You live alone. It's just common sense. I've lived in this house my whole life, I said quietly. It's kept me safe longer than any man ever did. I think I'll trust it a little longer. His smile dropped. God, you're impossible, he muttered, always clinging to this old place like it's holy. Maybe it is, I said. He looked at me for a long moment, then stood, snatched the folder, and left. The door slammed so hard the photos on the wall rattled. That was 3 months ago. Since then, he'd come back 4 times, each visit colder, each word sharper. Every time he'd bring the same folder, the same papers. He'd say things like, "Don't you trust me?" or "Do it for Lucy." And every time, that voice inside me whispered, "Wait." A month ago, I ran into our neighbor, Helen Brooks, outside by the mailbox. Helen's been my friend for 30 years, a retired librarian with kind eyes and a memory like a filing cabinet. She knows everyone's story on this hill and most of their secrets. "You've looked tired lately," she said as we stood in the drizzle, pulling our coats close. "Just family things," I admitted. "Daniel again?" she asked softly. I nodded. "He wants me to sign over the house." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Be careful, Maggie. My brother tried to do that with our mother's house. Took everything when she got sick. Promised he'd take care of her." Helen's words stuck with me. That night, I hid the spare deed and insurance papers in a tin box under the floorboards in my bedroom closet. I didn't tell anyone, not even Lucy. Something deep inside me knew this wasn't just about family paperwork. It was about ownership, about control. Now, standing by the kitchen window, watching the rain roll down the glass, I thought about those papers again. The folder, the arguments, the exhaustion. And I thought about Daniel's voice, how it had changed from pleading to commanding. He'd always had a temper, even as a boy. When he wanted something, he'd stop at nothing to get it. I used to think that meant he was ambitious. Now I see it for what it really was, entitlement. When Lucy came down the stairs that evening, she startled me. I hadn't heard her door open. Her face was pale, eyes shadowed with something she didn't want me to see. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" she said, curling her fingers into her sleeves. "Of course. Why don't you trust Dad with the house?" The question cut through me like a blade. I turned from the window slowly. "Where did you hear that?" "I just heard him talk about it once," she said quickly, eyes down. "He said you're being stubborn." "Stubborn," I repeated, forcing a small laugh. "That's one word for surviving." Lucy didn't answer. She stared at the floor, her shoulders tense. For a moment, I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Fear, guilt, confusion. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to push her. She'd tell me when she was ready. At least, that's what I thought. After dinner, I opened the small wooden box I keep in the cabinet, my old letters, my husband's wedding ring, a few faded photos, and the first mortgage deed. I ran my fingers across the paper, tracing the inked edges of my name, Margaret Holloway. That name was all I had left of who I used to be. The thought of losing it, losing the home that bore it, made my chest ache. When Daniel was a child, we used to play a game called Find Home. I'd hide somewhere in the house and call out softly, and he'd run through the rooms shouting, "I'm coming, Mom." When he found me, he'd throw his arms around me and whisper, "Found you, found home." I wonder now, when did he stop believing I was home and start seeing me as property? At 9 that night, the phone rang. The sound jolted me. Calls that late never bring good news. I answered, and Daniel's voice filled the line, soft, careful, rehearsed. "Hey, Mom. Did I wake you?" "No, I was just reading." "Good." He paused. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For the papers. For pushing. I shouldn't have done that." The words sounded right, but the tone didn't. There was no warmth, no real remorse, just calculation. "It's all right, Daniel," I said cautiously. "We'll talk another time." Yeah. Another time, he said, and hung up before I could say goodbye. I stared at the phone, the silence humming like electricity. Something was coming. I could feel it in my bones, that strange, ancestral warning that mothers get when danger has already crossed the threshold. Upstairs, Lucy stirred in her room, her face illuminated by her phone screen. She wasn't scrolling or texting. She was rereading the notes she'd made, the ones she'd typed after seeing her father slip that white packet into my coat. She had written everything down, word for word. She knew that when the time came, she'd need proof. When I went upstairs to check on her, I stopped by her door. She was sitting cross-legged on the bed, her hair falling over her face. She looked so small, so fragile, so heartbreakingly quiet. "Good night, sweetheart," I said softly. She looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. "Good night, Grandma." I stood there for a moment, wanting to tell her something comforting, something like, "Two-way. You can always tell me anything." But I didn't, because I didn't know what shadows she was already fighting in her mind. I closed the door, and the sound of the rain swallowed everything else. Downstairs, the folder still sat on the counter from his last visit, a ghostly reminder of what he wanted. I stared at it for a long time before tucking it into the drawer under the stove. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, maybe out of fear, maybe out of love. Before bed, I walked through the house, turning off lights one by one, whispering to myself like a prayer. "He's my son. He wouldn't hurt me." But deep down, another voice, the one that has kept me alive this long, whispered back, "You don't really believe that anymore, do you?" And for the first time, I didn't have an answer. The next morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of morning where everything feels muffled, as if the world itself is holding its breath. I stood by the kitchen window, watching the rainwater trickle down the glass like thin, trembling veins. The air smelled of damp earth and unease. Lucy came down the stairs still in her pajamas, her hair tangled from a restless night. She gave me a small, tired smile and sat at the table. I poured her hot cocoa the way she liked, 2 marshmallows floating on top, though she only stared at them until they melted into white foam. "Did you sleep?" I asked. "A little," she murmured. "You look pale, sweetheart." "I'm okay, Grandma." She wasn't. I could tell. Children lie differently from adults. They lie to protect, not to deceive. Whatever was happening inside her, she believed keeping it quiet was saving us both. When she left to draw in the living room, I tidied the kitchen, but my thoughts were far from the dishes. Every sound seemed louder that day, the clock ticking, the roof creaking, the faint buzz of the refrigerator. Even the house felt uneasy, as if it could sense the storm that was coming. At noon, I stepped out to the porch to bring in the mail. A letter from the utility company, a grocery flyer, and one thin envelope with no return address. My hands trembled before I even opened it. Inside was a single typed note. "Refuse to sign again, and you'll regret it. D." I felt the blood drain from my face. Daniel had never threatened me before, not openly. But there it was, proof that the boy I once sang to sleep had turned into a man who wanted to scare his own mother. I stood there in the drizzle, the letter fluttering in my hand like a wounded bird. My instinct screamed to call the police. But then I thought of Lucy, her wide, anxious eyes, her small frame already burdened with too much. I couldn't drag her into a storm she didn't cause. So I did what mothers do. I folded the thread in half, tucked it into my pocket, and pretended I hadn't seen it. Lucy was sitting cross-legged on the carpet when I came back inside, her sketchbook open in front of her. She was drawing the house again, but this version looked different. Darker. The windows were blacked out. The roof sagged. The front door was slightly ajar, and Tiny Shape's eyes maybe hid behind it. "Sweetheart," I said softly, kneeling beside her. "That's a bit spooky, isn't it?" She shrugged. "It's just a drawing." Her tone was too calm, too rehearsed. "Does something scare you?" I asked. Her pencil stopped. Her small hand tightened. Then she whispered, "Grandma, if someone you loved did something bad, would you still love them?" Her voice cracked on the last word. I froze. "I suppose I would love them," I said carefully. "But I might not be able to forgive them." She nodded slowly, as if filing that answer away. Then she closed her sketchbook. If I'd asked who she was talking about, maybe everything would have unfolded differently. But I didn't. Because sometimes the truth hides behind questions we're too afraid to finish. At 4 o'clock, the phone rang again. The caller ID flashed Daniel Holloway. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the button. Part of me wanted to let it ring, but I answered. "Mom," he said, his voice too smooth. "We need to talk." I thought we already did. "I don't want to fight anymore. I just want to fix things." My stomach turned. His tone was gentle, almost tender, the same way he used to sound before asking for money. "I'm fine, Daniel," I said. "There's nothing to fix." "You sure about that?" he said. "Because if you'd just sign those papers, we'd both be fine." My chest tightened. "Daniel, this house isn't for sale." His sigh on the other end sounded like anger wearing a mask of pity. "Mom, sometimes you hold on so tight you choke the life out of what you love." "I'm not choking anything," I whispered. "I'm protecting it." "From me?" That silence between us stretched taut, suffocating. Then he said, very quietly, "You're going to make me do things I don't want to do." I opened my mouth to speak, but the line went dead. By evening, the rain had stopped, but the sky stayed heavy, swollen with clouds that refused to leave. Lucy helped me with dinner, though her movements were distracted, her mind elsewhere. When she thought I wasn't looking, she kept glancing toward my green coat on the rack. When I finally noticed, I asked, "Is there something wrong with my coat?" Her face drained of color. "No, Grandma. I just like the color." I smiled faintly, brushing it off. "It's old, but it's kept me warm." She said nothing. That night, I watched her from across the table, the way she fidgeted, the way her eyes darted every time thunder rolled outside. She was protecting something. I could feel it. I wanted to reach across the table, grab her hand, and beg her to tell me what was haunting her, but my pride stopped me. I didn't want to admit that I was afraid, too. At 9 p.m., when I thought she was asleep, I went to hang my coat by the door. My fingers brushed the pocket. Something crinkled inside. For a moment, I froze. Then I reached in and pulled out. Nothing but a stray tissue. I laughed at myself, a hollow, shaky sound. "You're losing it, Maggie," I whispered. But upstairs, Lucy was sitting wide awake, clutching her phone to her chest. Her stomach churned as she replayed the words she'd typed into her notes earlier that day. "Dad came this morning, put white packet in Grandma's green coat, said someone named Vanessa will call the police at 9, said house will be ours." She reread it until the words blurred. Then she took a deep breath and made her decision. If no one else would protect her grandmother, she would. Even if it meant going against her own father. When she crept down the stairs, I was already in my room, half asleep. Lucy tiptoed to the coat rack and slid her hand into the pocket. Her fingertips brushed plastic. She pulled out the small white bag and stared at it under the hallway light. She'd seen enough in school videos, posters to recognize it. Cocaine. She pressed her fist to her mouth to keep from crying. Her father, her hero, had just turned into the villain of her nightmares. She looked around desperately, her young mind racing. She couldn't throw it away, he might come back. She couldn't hide it in her room, he might search there. Finally, she ran to the garden. The rain had left the ground soft and wet. Lucy knelt by the old apple tree and dug a shallow hole with her hands, burying the bag deep in the mud. Her small fingers trembled as she covered it with dirt and leaves. By the time she came back inside, her pajamas were soaked, and her heart was beating so loud she thought it might wake me. She whispered to herself, "You won't hurt her, Dad. I promise." Then she wiped the mud from her hands and crept upstairs, unaware that her father's plan and her act of defiance had already set in motion a night that would change everything. That house, the one I loved more than my own life, would soon become the stage of a war I never asked for. And my granddaughter, that fragile, fearless girl, was about to become the soldier who saved me. The night before, it all came crashing down. The storm returned. Thunder rolled over Waverly Hill like a wounded beast, shaking the glass panes. Wind rattled the maple branches against the roof, each knock echoing through the rooms like a warning. The power flickered twice, casting brief shadows across the kitchen walls, long, skeletal shapes that reminded me of the years I'd spent raising a child in the dark, hoping love alone could keep the monsters out. But love doesn't stop monsters. It just gives them a place to hide. Lucy sat curled on the sofa, a blanket draped over her knees, pretending to read a book. Every time lightning flashed, her eyes flicked toward the front door, toward the green coat still hanging there. I tried not to notice. I brewed chamomile tea instead, the scent filling the house, masking the smell of rain. "Grandma," Lucy said suddenly, her voice fragile as paper. "What would you do if someone tried to take this house?" Her question startled me. I turned slowly. "Why would you ask that?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Just wondering." I walked over and sat beside her, my knees aching as I bent down. "This house isn't just wood and paint, sweetheart. It's family. I was born here. So was your dad. It's seen everything good and bad. If someone ever tried to take it, I'd fight. I'd fight harder than I've ever fought for anything." Her eyes lifted to mine. For a second, I thought she was about to tell me something, but she didn't. She just nodded and looked away. If only I'd pressed her. If only I'd asked who she meant. By 8 o'clock, the rain had thickened into a steady curtain. The world outside looked like it was dissolving. The house felt small, isolated, as though every drop of water outside was sealing us in. I busied myself in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for the soup I hadn't had time to make earlier. The rhythmic tap of the knife on the cutting board was my lullaby, the same sound that had soothed me through loneliness, through widowhood, through the silence after Daniel stopped calling. "Grandma?" Lucy called softly from the living room. "Yes, sweetheart? Can I sleep in your room tonight? The thunder's too loud." Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence, and I smiled a tired, motherly smile. "Of course you can." I thought she was just afraid of the storm. I didn't know she was afraid of her father. At 8:30, I went upstairs to change into my robe. I didn't hear the first knock on the door, the wind was too loud. But Lucy did. 3 knocks, firm, measured. She froze on the stairs. When I came down moments later, smoothing my robe, she whispered, "Someone's outside." I peeked through the curtain. A figure stood under the porch light, drenched in rain, water streaming down his face. It was Daniel. For a second, my breath caught. Relief, fear, and anger collided in my chest. He looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him, his eyes hollow, his jaw clenched. I opened the door. The rain hit my face like cold needles. "Daniel," I said, "what are you doing here?" "Mom," he said softly, stepping in. "We need to talk." He didn't wait for an invitation. His shoes left dark prints across the rug. Lucy retreated a step, clutching the banister. She looked like a bird ready to bolt. "Sit down, Daniel," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "You're soaked. Let me make you coffee." He shook his head. "No coffee, just listen." He ran a hand through his wet hair and looked around the room. His gaze lingered on the coat rack. My stomach tightened. "I'm sorry for the other night," he began, "for losing my temper. You were right not to sign. I pushed too hard." Something about his tone didn't match the words, too controlled, too rehearsed. I'd heard that voice before. He used it when lying to teachers, to bosses, to his wife. "It's all right," I said carefully. "I just want peace." "Me too." He smiled faintly, but there was no peace in his eyes. "I've been thinking, maybe we could start over. You, me, and Lucy. A clean slate." I wanted to believe him. God help me, I did. But Lucy's face told me what I refused to see. She was watching her father the way prey watches a snake. He sat down across from me, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. His voice softened, almost pleading. "Mom, I need your help. I got in deep, real deep. Some bad people. I owe money, and they're not patient. I just need 50,000 to clear it. That's all. I swear I'll pay it back." There it was. The truth or a piece of it. "Daniel," I said quietly, "what have you done?" "Nothing illegal," he snapped, then softened again. "Just bad investments. Trust me, I'm fixing it." I felt the same old ache rise in my chest, that mix of love and dread that every mother knows when her child asks for something she can't give. "I don't have that kind of money," I said. "Yes, you do," he replied sharply. "It's sitting in your savings account." I checked. I froze. "You checked?" He smiled the kind of smile that used to charm teachers, girlfriends, strangers. "Relax, Mom. I just wanted to make sure you were safe. That's all." "Safe from what?" I whispered. "From yourself," he said coldly. The storm outside seemed to echo his words. Thunder crashed. Lightning flared across his face, and for the first time, I saw what I hadn't wanted to see. There was no love left in his eyes. Only calculation. Lucy stood behind the couch, recording everything on her phone, her hands trembling so badly the camera shook. I stood up, trying to steady my voice. "Daniel, I think you should leave. We'll talk tomorrow." He rose too, looming over me. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," I said, "but it's mine to make." He laughed softly, a humorless, hollow sound. "You always think you know best, don't you? The wise old woman who sacrificed everything. Newsflash, Mom, nobody cares about your sacrifices. The world's moved on. Then move with it," I said quietly. His jaw tightened. "You'll regret this." He turned, grabbed his coat, and stormed out. The door slammed. Rain rushed in behind him like an exhale from hell itself. I stood there, shaking, staring at the space where he'd just been. Lucy rushed to me and wrapped her arms around my waist. "It's okay, Grandma," she whispered. "He's gone." But I knew he wasn't gone for good. Men like Daniel don't leave empty-handed. They wait. They circle back. I looked toward the window. The rain was relentless, blurring the world beyond our porch. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "go upstairs, get some sleep." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I lied. "I'll be fine." When she disappeared up the stairs, I sat on the sofa and stared at the green coat by the door. The faint outline of its pocket seemed to glow in the dim light, an innocent piece of fabric holding a secret neither of us could erase. The storm howled. The clock ticked. And somewhere, I swear, the house itself groaned as if it knew the weight of the sin buried within its walls. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer I hadn't said in years. Not for myself, not even for Lucy, but for Daniel. Because deep down, I already knew what I would discover by morning. By morning, the storm had broken, leaving a damp silence so thick it almost felt unreal, the kind of quiet that only comes after something violent has passed. The house smelled of wet earth and ashes. I found Lucy asleep in my bed, one hand still clutching her phone. Even in sleep, her brow was furrowed as if her mind hadn't stopped running. I brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered, "You're safe, my love." But the words felt fragile, uncertain, like glass that could shatter with one wrong sound. The day crawled by slowly. Every knock of a tree branch outside made me flinch. Every car that passed the window made my heart trip. I tried to keep busy: laundry, dishes, soup simmering again on the stove, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. By evening, the unease had grown claws. I couldn't stop glancing at the green coat by the door. It hung there like an accusation. At 8 o'clock, Lucy sat at the kitchen table, pretending to do her homework. I could see she was listening for something for someone. Her pencil barely moved across the paper. I opened my mouth to speak when a sudden sound made us both freeze. The doorbell. Not once, twice. Then, silence. My stomach clenched. I knew before I even looked. Daniel. I saw his silhouette through the frosted glass, tall, still, patient. The kind of stillness that meant danger. "Grandma," Lucy whispered, "don't open it." I forced a small smile. "It's okay, sweetheart." But I was lying to her, and to myself. I unlocked the door. Daniel stood under the porch light, rainwater dripping from his hair. His gray coat darkened almost black. He gave a small, polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom," he said softly, "can I come in?" I hesitated, every instinct screaming no. But before I could answer, he stepped forward, crossing the threshold as though he owned it. Lucy stood behind me, tense as a bowstring. "Lucy," I said gently, "go upstairs." She didn't move. "Now," I said again. She hesitated, then climbed halfway up the stairs, stopping at the landing where she could still see us. Daniel watched her go, then turned to me. "You look tired, Mom. Did you even sleep?" "No," I said truthfully. "I couldn't." He nodded, eyes wandering around the living room, settling for a moment on the coat rack. "I guess storms do that. Make you restless." He sat down without being asked, water dripping from his sleeves onto the rug. I stood by the doorway, my arms crossed to hide the shaking in my hands. "I came to apologize," he said finally, "for what I said last night." "Apologies usually come with explanations," I replied. He smirked faintly. "Fair enough. I'm under pressure, Mom. You wouldn't understand. There are people I owe, and they're not the forgiving type." "Then go to the police," I said. His smirk vanished. "You really think that's how this works?" He leaned forward, his voice low. "They'll come after me. Maybe after you. I'm just trying to keep everyone safe." "Safe?" I whispered. "You came here yelling threats, demanding money, and now you want to talk about safety?" He rubbed his face, sighing heavily. You always see the worst in me. No, Daniel, I said softly. I just finally see you clearly. For a moment, we sat in silence. The clock ticked. The house groaned. Then he stood. I just need the money, he said again. 50,000. I'll disappear if that's what you want. You'll never have to see me again. I don't have it, I said, keeping my voice steady. Yes, you do, he snapped. It's in your savings. I checked. Don't lie to me. You went through my accounts? He didn't answer. The silence was louder than any confession. Lucy, hidden halfway up the stairs, began quietly recording again. The red light on her phone blinked like a heartbeat. Daniel, I said carefully, please leave. He stepped closer. You're making a mistake. Maybe, I said. But at least it's my mistake to make. He tilted his head, his expression somewhere between pity and rage. You think you can fight me? You think your old age and your sentimental stories make you untouchable? Not untouchable, I said. Just not yours to break. Something snapped inside him. His voice rose. You think this house means anything? It's just wood and plaster. You've wasted your life clinging to dead things. He was shouting now, veins bulging in his neck. Lucy flinched, tears gathering in her eyes. Daniel, stop, I shouted back. You're scaring her. That seemed to jolt him for a moment, anyway. He looked toward the stairs and saw Lucy standing there, recording every word. Put that down, he said sharply. She shook her head. No. His face twisted. You don't even know what you're doing, Lucy. You're a child. Maybe, she said, her voice trembling. But at least I'm not a liar. Something flickered behind his eyes, something dark, wounded, dangerous. Go upstairs, I said firmly. Now. She hesitated, then backed away, still holding the phone. Daniel turned back to me, his breath ragged. You've poisoned her against me. She saw you all by herself, I said. You did that. His fists clenched. You're going to regret this, Mom. Both of you. He turned toward the door. Daniel, I called after him, my voice breaking. Don't do this. You can still fix it. Just tell the truth. He stopped, one hand on the doorknob. The truth? He said bitterly. The truth is, you owe me everything. Then he left. The door slammed so hard the windows rattled. Outside, thunder cracked once a single, violent note that made the whole house shake. I sank into the armchair, my heart pounding. Lucy came down slowly, her face pale. Grandma, she whispered. I recorded everything. I looked up at her, that small, brave girl standing there in her socks and trembling hands, and realized she'd been my only defense this entire time. Good, I said, forcing strength into my voice. Keep it safe. We might need it. She nodded. We didn't speak for a long time after that. We just sat together on the couch, listening to the rain start up again, softer now, but steady. I stared at the coat by the door. My stomach turned. The sight of it made me feel sick, as if it were a loaded gun I'd forgotten to unload. I didn't know it then, but the night wasn't over. It was only pausing, the kind of pause a storm takes when it gathers strength before striking again. Because my son wasn't finished, and the next time he came back, he wouldn't come alone. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Lucy. The house was wrapped in silence thick enough to choke on. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a warning. Every gust of wind against the window made my pulse jump. I sat in my armchair with a blanket over my knees and a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Lucy sat curled beside me, still in her pajamas, clutching her phone like a weapon. The screen was dark, but I could see her thumb hovering near the record icon, just in case. Grandma, she whispered at one point. He's not coming back tonight, is he? I wanted to say no. I wanted to say something comforting and simple, a lie wrapped in love. But my mouth couldn't form the words. I don't know, sweetheart, I said softly. But if he does, we'll be ready. The moment I said it, I realized how wrong those words sounded. Mothers shouldn't have to prepare for battle against their own children. But love doesn't erase what danger demands. It just hurts more when you have to protect yourself from your own blood. It was nearly midnight when I saw her hands start to shake. Lucy, I said gently, why don't you get some rest? I can't, she whispered. I keep hearing his voice. I brushed her hair back. He's not here. Just breathe, my love. She looked up at me then, eyes wide and shining. Grandma, I have to tell you something. My stomach tightened. What is it? She took a deep breath. Then another, as though the truth itself might choke her. Dad came here yesterday morning when you were upstairs. I froze. What do you mean? I saw him, she said, her voice trembling but determined. He unlocked the door and came in. He didn't know I was home. My chest constricted. He came in? She nodded. He went to your green coat. He took something from his pocket, a little white bag, and he put it in yours. Then he called someone and said, "It's done. She won't understand a thing." The room tilted around me. For a second, I couldn't breathe. What kind of bag?" I managed to ask. She hesitated, then whispered, "Drugs, Grandma. I think it was drugs." My blood turned cold. "How do you know that?" "I've seen them at school. I know what they look like. He said someone named Vanessa would call the police at 9, and they'd find it here in your coat. He was going to blame you. He said when they arrested you, the judge would give him the house." I covered my mouth with my hands. Tears stung my eyes. My throat burned. "Lucy." "I took it," she said quickly, her small voice rising. "I took it before the police came. I buried it in the garden under the apple tree." She looked terrified, not of punishment, but of disbelief. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she cried. "I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want them to take you away." I gathered her into my arms. She was shaking so hard I could feel her heartbeat against my chest. "Shh," I whispered, my own tears falling into her hair. "You did the right thing. You saved me." For a long moment, I couldn't move. My son, my Daniel, had tried to frame me. The thought burned through my body like acid. The same hands I'd held when he took his first steps. Those hands had planted something to destroy me. When I finally stood, I felt dizzy. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The rain had stopped. The world outside was drenched and still, but the silence didn't comfort me anymore. It was the kind of silence that comes before something breaks. "Grandma?" Lucy said softly. "What do we do now?" I turned toward her, my hands trembling. "We think. We stay calm." She nodded, wiping her face with her sleeve. I looked at the clock, 12:17 a.m., and something inside me hardened. "We can't tell him we know," I said. "Not yet. If he finds out, he'll change the plan. He'll try something else. We need proof and protection." Lucy frowned. "Proof?" "Yes. You said you recorded him tonight, right?" She nodded and handed me the phone. I pressed play, and Daniel's voice filled the room, angry, desperate, venomous. The recording caught every word, the money, the threats, the accusations. When the audio ended, my heart was hammering. "This," I said, "is our shield." "But what about the bag?" she asked. "Should we dig it up?" "Not yet," I said. "If he comes back and he finds it gone, he'll know. Let it stay hidden until the police can see it." Her eyes widened. "You mean?" "Yes," I said firmly. "We're going to the police, but we'll wait until morning. For now, we lock every door, every window." Together, we moved through the house, checking each latch, each lock. Lucy followed close behind, her small flashlight cutting slices of light through the dark hall. When we reached the coat rack, I stopped. The green coat still hung there, heavy with rainwater from the day before. I stared at it, my breath shallow. I touched the pocket empty. The faint scent of damp wool filled my nose, sharp and bitter. "I loved this coat," I murmured. "Your grandfather gave it to me the winter before he left. I kept it all these years because it reminded me of the promise I made to myself, that I'd survive no matter who walked away." Lucy took my hand. "And you did." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "And I will again." When we finished locking up, we sat together at the kitchen table, the only light coming from the small lamp by the window. Outside, fog began to creep back up from the woods, swallowing the garden. Somewhere out there, beneath that fog, the little bag of white powder was waiting silent, damning proof of my son's betrayal. I looked at Lucy, her face pale but steady. There was something fierce in her, something I'd never seen before. Strength born from love, not anger. "Grandma," she said, "you're not mad at me for not telling you sooner?" I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. You did what you had to. You saved me. That's what matters." She leaned against my shoulder, and for the first time that night, I let myself cry. Not just for what my son had done, but for what I had lost long before that. For the mother who believed love could fix anything. For the woman who spent her whole life forgiving. For the child I raised who had become a stranger. I cried until the first light of dawn touched the window, and as I watched the gray sky brighten, I made a vow quiet but unbreakable. I would not go down quietly. I would not let him destroy the only thing still worth saving: our home, our name, our peace. When the clock struck 7, I wiped my eyes and took a deep breath. "It's time," I said. Lucy looked up, still holding my hand. "Time for what?" "To end this," I said. "We're going to the police." She nodded. As I stood, my reflection caught in the mirror by the doorway. The woman staring back at me looked nothing like the one who'd poured tea the day before. Her eyes were raw, her hair unkempt, but there was something else, something fierce, almost defiant. I realized then that I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a survivor. The sun rose pale and cold, turning the dew on the grass into tiny shards of glass. For the first time in 48 hours, the world looked calm, deceptively calm. I stood by the window with my coffee untouched, the steam curling upward, disappearing into the morning light. Lucy sat beside me, already dressed, her backpack slung over her shoulder. But inside, it wasn't notebooks or pencils. It was the phone with Daniel's recording, 2 spare chargers, and a small USB drive she'd insisted on keeping as a backup. Her eyes, though tired and ringed with purple, were steady. She was ready. "You don't have to come with me, sweetheart," I told her softly. "Yes, I do," she said. "You won't believe me, but I'm not scared anymore." Her voice carried that quiet conviction only the very young and the very brave have. We left the house at 8:30. The streets of Waverly Hill glistened after the rain. Storefronts opened, people swept sidewalks, a delivery truck honked somewhere in the distance, all of life going on, completely unaware that a grandmother and a little girl were about to walk into a police station carrying the evidence of a son's betrayal. The station itself sat at the end of Maple Avenue, an old brick building with ivy crawling up one side. The flag outside flapped lazily in the weak wind. When we stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. A young officer behind the desk looked up and smiled politely. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" I hesitated, my voice catching in my throat. "I need to file a report." "About my son." The officer's expression softened. "All right, take a seat. I'll get someone for you." We were led into a small gray room with a metal table, 2 chairs, and a flickering fluorescent light that hummed like an anxious heartbeat. The officer, a woman named Detective Mara Jensen, closed the door behind her and sat across from us. She looked kind but sharp, the kind of person who'd seen enough lies to know one before it finished leaving your mouth. "Take your time," she said gently. "Start from the beginning." I took a deep breath. The story came out in pieces: how Daniel had been pressuring me to sign the house over, how he'd changed, how Lucy had seen him sneak in, how she'd found the drugs, how we'd buried them, how he'd come back last night to threaten me again. Detective Jensen didn't interrupt. She only nodded occasionally, her pen scratching notes onto a yellow pad. When I finished, she leaned back, silent for a long moment. "Do you still have the bag he planted?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Buried in the garden, under the apple tree." "And you're sure it was your son?" "Yes." My voice cracked. "I wish I wasn't." She nodded slowly. "All right, we're going to handle this carefully. I'll send a team to retrieve the evidence. Do you have anything else? Messages? Recordings?" Lucy opened her backpack and took out the phone. "We recorded him last night," she said. "He said everything about the money, the threats. You can hear it all." Detective Jensen plugged the phone into her laptop. As the audio played, her expression hardened. She paused it halfway through and met my eyes. "This is enough to open an investigation," she said firmly. "Mrs. Hayes, your son committed multiple crimes: fraud, possession, intimidation. If we can confirm that the substance in the bag is illegal, this becomes a serious felony." The words, "serious felony," hit me like a hammer. I should have felt relief, safety, even, but all I felt was grief. "That's my child," I whispered. "My only child." Detective Jensen's gaze softened again. "Sometimes the people we raise turn into strangers, ma'am, but you and your granddaughter did the right thing." Within an hour, 2 uniformed officers accompanied us back to the house. The garden was still damp, the earth dark and soft. Lucy led them to the apple tree, her small finger pointing to the spot she'd dug. As they unearthed the bag, one of the officers whistled low. "This is high-grade cocaine," he muttered. No question. He sealed it in a plastic evidence pouch, labeled it, and handed it to Detective Jensen, who slipped on her gloves and turned it over in her hand. We'll test for fingerprints, she said. If your son handled it without gloves, we'll have confirmation by tonight. I nodded numbly. Lucy stood beside me, her hand gripping mine. Does this mean he'll go to jail? She asked quietly. Jensen hesitated. If everything checks out, yes. Lucy looked down at her muddy shoes. Good. Her voice didn't sound triumphant. It sounded heavy, exhausted like a soldier who'd just won a battle she never wanted to fight. By the time the officers left, it was almost noon. The house felt emptier somehow, though nothing inside had changed. I made lunch, or tried to, but neither of us ate much. Lucy sat at the table, doodling quietly in her notebook. Her drawing wasn't of the house this time, it was of an apple tree. Beneath it, 2 tiny figures stood hand in hand. Above them, a black storm cloud split open, but only one side of the picture was getting wet. The other was bright, dry, untouched. What's that? I asked softly. She shrugged. Us. And the rain can't reach us anymore. I smiled, though my chest ached. You're right, sweetheart. It can't. At 3 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Detective Jensen. Mrs. Hayes, she said, we have the test results. The fingerprints on the bag match your son's. We also traced the anonymous police call from last night. It came from a phone registered to a woman named Vanessa Ruiz. Does that name mean anything to you? The name made my stomach drop. I remembered Daniel mentioning a Vanessa months ago, a friend from his office. She's his girlfriend, I said weakly. That's what we thought, Jensen replied. We have a warrant out for both of them. We'll keep you updated. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Lucy looked at me, eyes wide. What is it? They found fingerprints, I said. They know it was your dad. They're arresting him and the woman who helped him. She didn't answer. She just nodded once and turned away, staring out the window at the garden. I could see her reflection in the glass, small, still, and heartbreakingly old for her age. I wanted to tell her it was over, that justice was done, that we could go back to normal, but I couldn't, because I knew better. Justice doesn't end the pain, it just draws a line under it. And I still didn't know which would hurt more, watching my son go to prison, or watching my granddaughter grow up knowing he deserved to be there. The call came at dusk. The sky outside had turned the color of bruised lavender, the sun bleeding behind the clouds like a dying ember. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when the phone rang again, the sound slicing through the quiet house like a blade. Mrs. Hayes? Detective Jensen's voice carried a note of restrained satisfaction. We've got him. My heart stumbled. You arrested him? Yes. Your son, Daniel Hayes, and his accomplice, Vanessa Ruiz, were taken into custody this afternoon. We found additional evidence, text messages between them discussing the plan. It's all there. You and your granddaughter are safe now. Safe. The word echoed through my chest, hollow and heavy. Lucy looked up from the dining table, where she was sketching another of her careful, sad little drawings. Grandma? I forced my lips to move. It's over, I whispered. They caught him. But that night, sleep didn't come easy. Relief isn't peace, not when it's built on the ruins of love. I lay awake listening to the old house breathe, its wood shifting and sighing in the cool air, like it knew what had been buried beneath it, not just the drugs, but decades of secrets, guilt, and motherly blindness. In the faint light from the street, I could see the photograph of Daniel on the nightstand. Him at 10 years old, holding up a kite with a grin that could melt stone. I turned the frame face down. Some pain deserves darkness. 2 days later, Detective Jensen called again. The arraignment's set for Monday, she said. You'll be notified when you need to testify. I know this isn't easy, Mrs. Hayes. No, I said, it isn't. But she was right, I had no choice. Lucy stayed home from school that day. She followed me around the house, quiet but watchful, as if afraid I might break without warning. Every time I smiled, she looked suspicious, like she could tell it was painted on. After lunch, she asked the question I'd been dreading. Grandma, do you still love him? I froze with my hands in the sink, water running over my wrists. The question sliced right through me. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe love doesn't disappear. Maybe it just changes shape, turns into something else. Like pain or memory. She thought about that for a long time before whispering, "I wish I could forget him." I turned off the water, dried my hands, and knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, you don't have to forget. You just have to remember that what he did isn't your fault or mine." Her eyes filled with tears. "But he's my dad." I pulled her close. "And you're my everything. That's what matters now." On Monday, we went to the courthouse. The place smelled like polished wood and fear. I held Lucy's hand tightly as we passed through the metal detector, the echo of our footsteps following us down the marble corridor. Inside the courtroom, Daniel sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit. For a moment, my mind refused to recognize him. He looked older, harder, yet somehow smaller. His face was pale, his hair unkempt, but his eyes were the same ones that used to look up at me from a crib. When he saw us, he didn't flinch. He just stared, unreadable. Vanessa sat beside him, her head bowed. She looked broken, a shell of the woman who'd helped him plan our destruction. The hearing was short. The charges were read. Possession with intent to distribute. Fraud. Conspiracy. False reporting to authorities. Each word landed like a nail sealing a coffin. The judge denied bail. The trial would be scheduled within 60 days. As the deputies led them away, Daniel turned once more. Our eyes met. "Mom," he said softly. "I'm sorry. The words should have meant something. But I felt nothing, no warmth, no rage, no forgiveness. Just emptiness, like the space left behind after a storm, tears through and takes everything with it." When we stepped outside, Lucy looked up at me. "Is it really over now?" she asked. I looked at the courthouse behind us, its cold stone walls gleaming in the sunlight, and shook my head. "Not yet, sweetheart, but it will be." We went home in silence. That night, the house felt strange, lighter, but lonelier too. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the shadows lengthen across the garden. The apple tree swayed gently, and I thought about what lay beneath its roots, the buried proof of betrayal. Maybe someday I'd dig there again, plant something new, something that would grow from the same soil that had once hidden the worst of us. For now, though, I just sat and listened to the wind whisper through the branches. It didn't sound like morning anymore. It sounded like beginning. 8 weeks later, winter came early. The morning of the trial, frost silvered the porch rails, and our breath hung in the air like smoke. I buttoned my wool coat slowly, the same one Daniel had once zipped for me when he was 7. Lucy stood beside me, wearing the green scarf I'd knitted her last Christmas. She looked older than 15, her innocence carved down to something quiet and resolute. We didn't speak on the ride downtown. The courthouse loomed against the pale sky, its stone steps dusted with snow. People hurried up and down with files in their arms, heads bent against the wind, unaware that today, a mother would testify against her only son. Inside, Detective Jensen met us by the door. "You both ready?" she asked gently. I nodded. "As ready as we'll ever be." She placed a hand on my arm. "Just tell the truth. That's all you need to do." When we entered the courtroom, my stomach twisted. Daniel sat between his lawyers, in a crisp navy suit this time. He looked thinner still, but clean, polished as though trying to resurrect the man he wanted everyone to believe he was. He didn't look at me right away. Only when I took the stand did his gaze lift, and for a moment, the years fell away. I saw the boy who used to press dandelions into my palms and call them tiny sons. But then I remembered the bag of white powder, the anonymous call, the night of the storm, and that image burned to ash. The prosecutor began gently. "Mrs. Hayes, could you please tell the court, in your own words, what happened on the morning of October 14th? My hands trembled as I spoke, but my voice stayed clear. I told them everything, how Daniel had pressured me to sign the deed, how he'd come into the house uninvited, how Lucy had seen him plant the bag, how we buried it, how he returned later to threaten me. When I reached the part where Lucy's voice cracked over the phone call he made, the courtroom went silent. Even the judge's pen paused mid-scratch. "And this," the prosecutor said, holding up a small recorder, "is the audio your granddaughter captured, correct?" "Yes." He pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the room. Cold, steady, confident. "She'll never see it coming. By the time the police arrive, she'll be finished. The house will be mine." The echo of it cut through the courtroom like glass breaking. I couldn't bear to look at him. When it was Lucy's turn to testify, She walked to the stand with her chin lifted high. Her small hands shook as she was sworn in, but when she spoke, her voice didn't falter. She told them about the morning she'd pretended to be sick, how she'd watched her father enter, how she'd hidden and recorded him later. At one point, the defense lawyer tried to corner her. "You're just a child," he said sharply. "Isn't it possible you misinterpreted what you saw?" Lucy looked him straight in the eye. "It's possible to misinterpret words," she said quietly, "not actions." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge's mouth softened. When the defense rested, Daniel finally took the stand. He began with apologies for the stress, for the misunderstandings. He tried to paint himself as desperate, manipulated by Vanessa, misunderstood by us. But when the prosecutor asked, "Did you, or did you not, plant a bag of cocaine in your mother's coat pocket?" his composure cracked. He hesitated too long. "Answer the question, Mr. Hayes." His jaw tightened. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." The courtroom gasped. Jensen met my eyes from the gallery, giving a small, knowing nod. That was it, the confession. The truth unspooling at last. The trial lasted 3 days. On the final afternoon, as the judge read the verdict, I held Lucy's hand. On the charge of conspiracy and attempted fraud, guilty. On the charge of possession, with intent to defraud, of guilty. On the charge of false report to authorities, guilty. Daniel's head bowed, his shoulders trembling. The judge's voice softened, but not with mercy. "Mr. Hayes, you plotted to destroy the life of the woman who gave you yours. This court sentences you to 8 years in state prison, with no parole for the first 4. A collective hochefel." Daniel looked up once, not at the judge, not at the jury, but at me. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm sorry." This time, I looked back. My heart ached, but my eyes were dry. "I know," I said softly, "but I can't save you from yourself anymore." When it was over, Lucy and I walked out into the snow. The world looked impossibly bright. She slipped her hand into mine. "Is he gone now?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "and we can finally live." We stood there a long time, watching the courthouse doors close behind us, closing on the past, on the grief, on the boy who never came home again. The morning after the verdict, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, for the first time in what felt like forever. It touched everything gently, the chipped teacup by the sink, the faded curtains, the clock that had outlived 2 generations of Hayes women. For once, the air didn't feel heavy. The house exhaled. Lucy sat at the table, eating toast with strawberry jam, the same breakfast I'd made her the morning all of this began. She looked peaceful now, her shoulders relaxed, her eyes brighter. There was still sadness, of course, but beneath it lay something stronger, resilience. "Grandma," she said softly, "does this mean it's really over?" I stirred my coffee and looked out at the garden, where frost glimmered on the soil above the apple tree. "It's over for now, sweetheart. But endings aren't tidy things. They're just quiet." She tilted her head. "Will we ever see him again?" I hesitated. "Maybe. Someday. People can change, but they have to want to. Until then, we keep living." Lucy nodded slowly, as though she understood more than her years should allow. The weeks that followed felt strange, like learning to walk again after years of crawling through fear. I cleaned every corner of the house, not because it needed it, but because I needed to reclaim it. The kitchen no longer smelled of tension. The hallway no longer felt haunted. One by one, I took down Daniel's photos, his graduation picture, his wedding, the baby photo that used to make me smile. I didn't burn them. I placed them in a box and tucked it in the attic. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I wasn't ready to erase him either. Lucy watched quietly as I worked. "You're not angry anymore, are you?" she asked one evening. "No," I said honestly. "Anger's a heavy thing. I carried it long enough. Now I just want peace." Detective Jensen called a month later. "I thought you'd want to know," she said. "Vanessa took a plea deal, 5 years, reduced for cooperation. And Daniel? 8 years confirmed. He's already enrolled in a counseling program in prison. It's something. Something." The word lingered after the call ended. Hope, maybe, or just the echo of it. That night, as Lucy slept, I sat by the window and wrote a letter I didn't intend to send. "Daniel, I don't know who you are anymore, but I hope one day you remember who you were. I hope the walls around you teach you what I couldn't, that love isn't ownership, and desperation isn't justification. I'll keep the house. I'll keep Lucy safe. I'll even keep a piece of forgiveness waiting for you, though I can't promise you'll ever earn it. Mom. When I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside the old photographs, I felt lighter. Spring came slowly that year. The apple tree blossomed again, pink and white petals trembling in the wind. Lucy helped me hang a bird feeder, and for the first time in months, the garden was filled with sound, the cheerful chatter of robins, the hum of bees, the laughter of a child learning joy again. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch with lemonade, Lucy turned to me and said, "I think I want to be a detective when I grow up, like Detective Jensen." I smiled. "You'd be good at it. You already saved a case once." She giggled, but then her expression turned thoughtful. "Do you think Dad knows we're okay?" I looked at the sky, a clean stretch of blue above us. "I think he does," I said quietly. "And that's what matters." That night, I stood by the window, looking out at the apple tree, swaying under the moonlight. I remembered everything, the fear, the betrayal, the long nights of doubt. But I also remembered Lucy's courage, her trembling voice saying, "He's trying to hurt you, Grandma." That voice had saved my life. I closed my eyes and whispered into the quiet, "We made it." The wind rustled through the branches, scattering petals like small blessings across the garden. For the first time in years, the sound didn't remind me of loss. It sounded like forgiveness, fragile, imperfect, but real. And as the moonlight bathed the old yellow house, I finally understood something I'd spent my whole life trying to learn. You can't control who betrays you, but you can choose who you become afterward. And I was done being afraid. It was nearly a year later when the letter came, the kind of thin, official envelope that carries too much weight for its size. The return address read Greywall State Correctional Facility. I stood in the kitchen, holding it for a long time before opening it. The kettle hissed behind me, forgotten on the stove. Lucy was at school, and the house was quiet, except for the slow ticking of the wall clock, that faithful witness to every chapter of our lives. When I finally tore it open, the paper trembled in my hands. The handwriting was unmistakable, firm, angular, Daniel's. "Mom, I don't know if you'll ever read this, or if you've already burned everything with my name on it. If you did, I wouldn't blame you. I've had a year to think, really think, about the house, about you, about what I did. At first, I told myself I was desperate, that I had no choice. But that's a lie. I wanted control. I wanted to prove something. And I ended up proving what you must have feared for years, that there's a darkness in me I never wanted to see. You used to tell me, you can lose everything in this world but never lose your name. I think about that every day when they call roll here. Hayes. That name sounds heavy now, like it belongs to someone better than me. I've started counseling. I'm clean. I work in the prison library. Sometimes, I help other inmates learn to read. It's strange, I finally understand what you meant about building something instead of taking. I can't undo what I did, but I can learn not to destroy again. Tell Lucy I'm sorry. Tell her that if she ever remembers me, I hope it's not just for what I took, but for what I might someday become. If you can't forgive me, I understand. But if you ever decide to write back, just address it to Greywall. I'll wait. Daniel. When I finished reading, I sat down at the kitchen table, the paper still trembling between my fingers. For a long time, I just stared at his words, at the black ink pressed into the white page like scars that refused to fade. I didn't cry. Not this time. There were no tears left, only the ache of something finally loosening, like a knot slowly giving way. That evening, when Lucy came home, I was sitting on the porch with the letter folded neatly beside me. "What's that?" she asked, noticing my expression. "A letter from your father," I said. She froze. "What did he say?" I handed it to her. She read silently, her lips pressed tight, her eyes flicking across the lines. When she finished, she folded it just as carefully as I had. "Do you believe him?" she asked. "I think," I said slowly, "that believing someone doesn't mean forgetting what they did. It just means hoping they'll learn to do better." She nodded. "Will you write back?" "Not yet," I admitted. "Forgiveness shouldn't be rushed. It needs roots." Lucy smiled faintly, like the apple tree. I looked at her, my granddaughter, the one who'd saved my life, and felt a wave of tenderness so fierce it almost hurt. Exactly like that. Weeks passed. Spring arrived again, soft and golden, painting everything in color. The apple tree bloomed early this year, heavy with white flowers that smelled of honey and rain. I tended the garden while Lucy sat on the grass doing homework, the afternoon sunlight turning her hair to amber. "Grandma," she said suddenly, "if you ever do write to him, can I add something?" "Of course," I said. "What would you say?" She looked thoughtful. "I'd tell him I'm okay. That I still remember when he used to read to me. That I don't hate him, I just don't trust him yet. But maybe one day." Her words hung in the air like a prayer, small, honest, and strangely beautiful. That night, I sat at my writing desk under the lamplight, the letter from Daniel lying open before me. I took out a sheet of stationery, the same floral kind I used to write him birthday notes when he was away at college. My pen hovered above the paper for a long moment before moving. "Daniel, I received your letter. I believe your regret is real, but forgiveness is not a switch to be turned on. It's a seed. Maybe one day it will grow. For now, I am proud that you are learning, truly learning, and not pretending. Keep building, even if it's behind walls. Lucy is strong. She remembers the good in you, and I suppose that's what keeps me from closing the door completely. Write again if you wish. I'll read it when I'm ready. Mom." I sealed the envelope and placed it by the door for the next morning's post. Then I looked out the window. The moonlight poured across the yard, glinting off the old green coat still hanging by the door, washed now, clean, its pockets empty. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to look at it. It was just a coat again. I turned off the light, stood by the window, and watched the apple blossoms drifting gently through the night air. They fell like snow, like quiet forgiveness returning to the earth. 2 more years passed before life began to feel simple again. Time has a strange way of sanding down the sharp edges of pain, turning the unbearable into something you can hold without bleeding. Lucy was 16 now, taller, wiser, and still carrying a small scar in her heart that only I could see. She'd filled her room with books and sketches, and she was saving every allowance dollar for a cheap camera because, she said, detectives need to document everything. I smiled every time she said it. As for me, I'd settled into the kind of peace I once thought impossible. My mornings were quiet, coffee, the sound of birds, the slow rhythm of a life no longer ruled by fear. The world outside our little yellow house kept spinning. Neighbors came and went. The city grew louder, but inside, our home had returned to its natural heartbeat. One afternoon that spring, I took Lucy into town for lunch at Harper's Cafe, the same place Daniel used to bring me on Mother's Day. It had changed over the years, new owners, new menu, but it still smelled of cinnamon and coffee grounds. Lucy was sketching people by the window when she asked, "Grandma, do you think Dad will ever come home?" I hesitated, stirring sugar into my tea. "I think home means something different now. Maybe someday he'll find his own kind of home, even if it's not this one." She nodded, her pencil scratching softly across the page. "Detective Jensen said some people really do get better after prison. She told me about someone she arrested years ago who's now working with the police." "That's good," I said. "Second chances matter, but you have to earn them." She smiled faintly. "Maybe Dad will." I reached across the table and took her hand. And maybe we already gave him his by surviving. That evening, when we returned home, the mailbox held another letter from Graywall. My hands didn't tremble this time. I opened it calmly while Lucy sat on the porch, listening to the crickets. "Mom, thank you for writing back. I can't tell you how much your words meant to me. I read them until the paper almost tore. I'm still in counseling. They let me tutor younger inmates now. I even started a small reading group. They call me Professor, which is funny, considering how much I once hated books. I'm eligible for early release next year for good behavior. Don't worry, I won't show up unannounced. I'll write first. I just want you to know that when I think of home now, I don't think of the house or the money. I think of you and Lucy sitting under that apple tree. I hope someday I can sit there too, even if it's just once. Your son, Daniel." I read it twice, then passed it to Lucy. She read it silently, her face unreadable in the amber porch light. When she finished, she asked, "Would you let him visit?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Part of me wants to see who he's become. The other part still remembers who he was." She nodded, folding the letter carefully. "Maybe the tree will decide." I laughed softly. "What do you mean?" She pointed toward the garden. "If it blooms next year like it did this one, that means it's time." "Is that so?" She smiled. Nature knows when it's safe to grow again. Months passed. Summer gave way to autumn. The air turned crisp, and the apple tree bore fruit, small, red, imperfect apples, but beautiful in their own stubborn way. One weekend, Lucy and I picked them together, filling an old wicker basket until it overflowed. When we were done, she wiped her hands on her jeans and said, "You should bake a pie. Dad used to love your pie." I froze for a second, then nodded. "Then we'll make one for all of us." That night, the scent of cinnamon and baked apples filled the house. We ate at the kitchen table, and for the first time, we spoke about Daniel without anger or sadness. Just memory, just truth. "He made terrible choices," Lucy said quietly, "but he also made me, so I guess I can't hate him completely." I smiled through tears I didn't expect. "No, sweetheart, none of us are only one thing. He was my failure and my miracle all at once." Later, after Lucy went to bed, I stepped outside. The moonlight brushed the apple tree, its leaves whispering softly. I sat beneath it, the cool earth firm under my palms. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed, faint, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. I thought about Daniel's letters, about forgiveness, about the strange, endless work of rebuilding. I realized then that home wasn't the house, or even the tree. Home was the choice to stay, to keep loving, to keep hoping even when the world has given you every reason not to. I looked up at the stars and whispered into the night, "We're waiting, Daniel, but only when you're ready." Inside, the clock struck midnight. I closed the door softly behind me, turned off the lights, and stood for a moment in the darkened living room. The walls no longer felt like witnesses to pain. They simply were strong, quiet, forgiving. And as I climbed the stairs to check on Lucy, I realized something simple and profound. The house we had fought to save was never just bricks and beams. It was the love that refused to die, even when everything else did. The following spring, the apple tree bloomed early again, a sign Lucy swore was proof. "It's time," she said one morning, leaning out the kitchen window with sunlight in her hair. "Remember what I said? When the tree blooms like this, he's ready." I laughed softly, but my stomach tightened. "Maybe," I murmured, staring at the heavy blossoms that bowed the branches almost to the ground. "Or maybe the world's just forgiving faster than I can." Still, that afternoon, I sat down at the kitchen table with a blank piece of paper and my fountain pen. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock and Lucy's humming upstairs. I wrote slowly, every word deliberate, as if each one might unlock a door I'd kept bolted shut. "Daniel, the tree has bloomed early this year. Lucy says it's a sign that forgiveness is in season. Perhaps she's right. If you've truly changed, if the man who wrote those letters is who you've become, then maybe it's time we see for ourselves. You may visit next month, one afternoon. No surprises, no anger, just truth. If you still mean what you wrote, bring that truth with you, nothing more." "Mom." I sealed the letter before I could change my mind. When Lucy came down for dinner, I told her, "He'll be coming." Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Here? To the house?" "Yes," I said. "Next month?" She swallowed hard, then whispered, "Okay." Her voice trembled, but there was no fear in her eyes, only curiosity and something like courage. The weeks crawled by with unbearable patience. Each day that passed, I found myself preparing the house like a hostess before a storm. Dusting, washing, rearranging, polishing things that didn't need polishing. Lucy noticed. "You're nesting," she teased. "Old habits," I said. "Mothers clean when they're nervous. Grandmothers clean when they're terrified." We both laughed, though our smiles didn't quite reach our eyes. When the day finally came, the air outside was thick with the smell of spring rain and apple blossoms. I wore my gray dress, the same one I'd worn to the trial, only this time with no courtroom, no judge, no fear. At 2 o'clock sharp, a taxi pulled into the driveway. My heart thudded painfully as I saw him step out, older, thinner, his hair streaked with silver. Prison had taken something from him, but not his eyes. Those were still Daniel's, the same eyes that once looked up at me from a crib, that once asked for bedtime stories. He stood at the edge of the porch, holding a small paper bag. "Mom," he said quietly, "may I come in?" Of course. He stepped over the threshold and froze, looking around as if seeing the house for the first time. "It smells the same," he murmured. "Yes," I said, Some things don't change. Then Lucy appeared in the doorway of the kitchen. She was taller now, her face sharp with the first signs of womanhood, but her eyes still held the same warmth that had once saved me. "Hi, Dad," she said. Daniel's breath caught. "Hi, sweetheart." For a long moment, none of us moved. Then Lucy crossed the room and hugged him. Not tightly, not like before, but enough. He looked at me over her shoulder, his eyes glistening. "Thank you," he mouthed. I nodded once. We sat at the kitchen table, the three of us, with the afternoon light spilling across the floor. He told us about his job at the halfway center tutoring, learning carpentry, attending therapy. He didn't hide his shame. He didn't make excuses. "I thought about that night every day," he said quietly, "about what I almost did to you both. It used to keep me up, but now it keeps me moving." I listened in silence, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Lucy asked him questions, small, cautious ones. "When did you start reading again? What's it like inside? Do you still write letters?" He answered each one gently, patiently. The man sitting across from us was no longer the furious, desperate son I'd once feared. He looked humbled, stripped of pride, but clothed in something better remorse. At one point, he reached into the paper bag and took out a small wooden carving of an apple tree. The craftsmanship was rough, but heartfelt. "I made this in the shop," he said, "for you both. It's not perfect, but it's something honest." Lucy took it in her hands and smiled. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to look away from my son. He stayed for 2 hours. When he stood to leave, he looked at me uncertainly, as if asking permission. "You'll write again?" I asked. He nodded. "If you'll let me." "I will," I said. "But Daniel." "Yes?" I met his eyes. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace every day, even when the past knocks." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll keep knocking until peace answers." After the taxi disappeared down the road, Lucy and I stood on the porch watching the blossoms drift through the air. The little wooden apple tree sat on the railing between us. "He really changed," she said softly. "Yes," I said. "Maybe we all did." She smiled, and for the first time, I realized her smile no longer carried the shadow of fear, only light, only hope. That night, as the wind whispered through the apple tree outside, I lay awake and thought of everything that had brought us here, the betrayal, the trial, the years of silence, and now this quiet reconciliation. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was real. And sometimes, real is better than perfect. Summer arrived gently that year. Slow mornings, golden evenings, the hum of cicadas blending with the laughter that once seemed impossible to hear in this house again. The air smelled of cut grass and apple blossoms. For the first time in years, life no longer felt like waiting for something to break. Daniel wrote regularly now, letters that arrived every 2 weeks, folded neatly and full of small, careful details. He never asked for forgiveness again. Instead, he wrote about things he was learning: how to fix broken chairs, how to plant tomatoes, how to build something steady from the pieces of his old life. Each letter was signed simply, "Your son, Daniel." No promises, no apologies, just presence. Sometimes Lucy read them aloud on the porch while I knitted or tended to the garden. I'd listen quietly as she smiled over some story about a fellow worker or a book he'd recommended. One afternoon she looked up and said, "He sounds different now, softer." I nodded. That's what happens when you finally stop running. One evening in late August, a package arrived from him heavier than a letter. Inside was a small wooden box, sanded smooth and sealed with beeswax. On the lid, he'd carved 3 words in simple, uneven script: "For our new beginning." Inside was a handful of apple seeds wrapped in linen and a note. "Mom, Lucy, these are from the orchard behind the workshop. Plant them beside the old tree. Not to replace it, to remind us that something broken can still grow again." Lucy held the seeds in her palm as if they were treasure. "Can we, Grandma?" "Yes," I said softly. "Let's give them a chance." That weekend, under the wide blue sky, we planted the seeds beside the apple tree. The soil was warm beneath our hands, rich and alive. Lucy pressed each seed gently into the earth, whispering something under her breath, maybe a wish, maybe a prayer. When we were done, I stood back and looked at the garden. The old apple tree stood tall, its branches still heavy with fruit, but now it had company, tiny, unseen roots beginning somewhere beneath the soil, ready to rise. "Do you think they'll grow?" Lucy asked. "Given time," I said. "Everything that's loved enough eventually does." Months later, as autumn settled in, Daniel wrote again, a short letter this time, almost hesitant. "Mom, they're reviewing my release date. If all goes well, I'll be home next spring. I won't ask to stay with you. I just want to see the garden, the tree, the new ones. That'll be enough for me." When I finished reading, Lucy took my hand. "We'll be ready," she said simply. And for the first time, I believed her. Winter came, but it wasn't cruel. The snow fell softly, covering the apple tree in white lace. Inside the house, warmth filled every corner, laughter, baking bread, music from Lucy's little radio. Sometimes, when the nights were quiet, I'd sit by the fire and imagine Daniel walking up the path next spring, older but free, looking toward the tree he'd once used as the backdrop to his worst act, now reborn as the symbol of everything he'd learned. The thought didn't hurt anymore. It felt like peace. The following April, when the snow melted and the garden came alive again, tiny green shoots broke through the soil beside the old tree, fragile, determined, full of life. Lucy shouted for me from the yard, her voice carrying across the breeze. "They're growing, Grandma. Look." I stepped out onto the porch and saw them, 3 small saplings reaching for the Sunday. And in that moment, I realized something simple but extraordinary. The story wasn't about what we'd lost. It was about what refused to die. It was about love bruised, battered, but still standing. It was about roots stubborn, deep, unbroken. It was about family imperfect, scarred, but still reaching for light. That night, as the wind whispered through the branches, I sat under the apple tree with Lucy beside me and whispered a quiet thank you to the stars. For survival, for growth, for the courage to begin again. Somewhere, miles away, I imagined Daniel looking at the same night sky, maybe even whispering the same words. And for the first time since that terrible storm years ago, I closed my eyes and slept without fear.